Hi, everybody. My name is James Bundy. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm a middle level education major in social studies. And this week we watched the movie Zero Dark 30, and it's about how the government and SEAL Team 6 hunted down Osama bin Laden. So, on this slide, we have some background information on stuff that happened and why this movie was made because of stuff that happened in real life. So, Osama bin Laden was the founder of Al Qaeda, which is an extremist militant organization that was founded in 1988 by Osama bin Laden. And he didn't agree with the things that the US was doing. They forced him out of Saudi Arabia, they forced him out of Sudan. He declared war upon the US after he was forced out of Sudan. He was the mastermind behind multiple terrorist attacks, including 9/11, but another big one was the U.S. Embassy bombings in Eastern Africa in 1998, and that was in retaliation for the U.S. involvement of torture upon members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. And then September 11th, 2001 was a terrorist attack that happened on U.S. soil. Four separate planned attacks. There was upon the Twin Towers, Pentagon, and then originally the U.S. Capitol building, but that one failed after passengers fought back on one of the flights. Bin Laden originally denied any wrongdoing for close to 3 years until he finally released a video in 2004 saying that he was behind these attacks because of the U.S. involvement with Israel and Saudi Arabia, and then the actions that were happening against Iraq. These attacks led to countries around the world strengthening their intelligence agencies and law enforcement to prevent future terrorist attacks because the US was considered a major power in the world then and now. But if it could happen to them, it could happen to anybody in the world because nobody usually messed with the United States. Then Osama bin Laden became the most wanted man in America for over 10 years due to these terrorist attacks because it led to close to 3,000 deaths, over 25,000 injuries, in addition to millions and millions of dollars in damages. President Obama eventually ordered SEAL Team 6 to either capture or kill bin Laden, and that ended up happening on May 2nd, 2011. And then this movie was eventually made about the events leading up to that incident.
Hi, I'm Ben Shire, a senior computer science major at Slippery Rock University, and I'm going to go over the summary of Zero Dark 30. It starts out with Maya and Dan, who are CIA operatives assigned to finding bin Laden. They are interrogating a man known as Amar, who is linked to multiple 9/11 hijackers to get information on an attack that was known to be happening in Saudi Arabia. They do get bad info on the Saudi attack, which ends up happening, but they get the name of what turns out to be a senior courier in Al Qaeda known as Abu Ahmed. Another terrorist later gets interrogated and denies that Abu Ahmed had contact with him after CIA intelligence said that he and bin Laden had received messages from the courier, which makes Maya believe that he's also a senior operative in Al Qaeda and that Abu Ahmed is important, and that's why he got his identity concealed. Um, It eventually, somebody had said that Abu Ahmed was originally believed to be dead because a terrorist said that he had killed him. But Maya ends up learning from a case manager that a man named Ibrahim Saeed traveled under the name Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, which they had not originally known the family name that he traveled under, which turned out to be al-Kuwaiti. The dead man that they originally thought was Abu Ahmed was Ibrahim Saeed's brother Habib. After that, Maya contacts Dan after he had not been seen there for them in the movie for a little bit there, who moved back to DC. Now is a senior operative, and she asked him to help her finish what they started. Dan ends up getting money and trades a Lamborghini Gallardo to a Pakistani prince for the phone number of Abu Ahmed's mother, which then in turn leads Maya to assign a CIA task force team to track any calls made to that phone, which they end up finding somebody they believe to be Abu Ahmed by pinging his cell phone as he's traveling in a car. The man that they believe to be Abu Ahmed, who ended up being Abu Ahmed, was trying to avoid identification at all costs, which made Maya think that he was a senior member of Al Qaeda, senior courier. The vehicle that Abu Ahmed was traveling in was tracked to a large urban compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. And right after that, they start trying to find out if anybody important actually lives there, because they can't prove that he lives there without seeing him. It's hard to get any sight lines because the massive outer walls, I believe they said they were about 16 feet. There's really no way to see anybody without getting like directly above it, which is not very possible. And Maya gets attacked leaving her home, so they believe that her cover gets blown. She gets pulled back to DC in fear for her safety. They still find no conclusive evidence that bin Laden is there, but the CIA gets tasked by Obama's national security advisor to create a plan to either capture or kill Osama bin Laden. Before briefing the president, the CIA director holds a meeting with his senior officers who say there's about a 60 to 80% chance that bin Laden's there. Maya, obviously quite confident in herself, gave a 100% chance that bin Laden would be in the compound. Eventually, SEAL Team 6 and the CIA depart very early in the morning, hence Zero Dark 30, which is a government phrase for very, very early in the morning before dawn. Depart in 2 stealth helicopters to raid the compound, killing multiple hostiles, and end up killing Osama bin Laden. It was not confirmed, though. They did bring the body back to a military base in Jalalabad, which was then confirmed by Maya to be, in fact, Osama bin Laden. The movie then ends with her getting on a C-130.
Some of the themes in Zero. Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Pulaski. I'm from Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm a political science pre-law major. I'm doing Zero Dark 30's connection to other films that we've watched during class. There's a couple of really interesting ones. I think Fog of War probably made for the best comparison. Not as much comparison, but it sparked a lot of conversation and debate. In the lunch scene, you could argue that that was, his first lesson about empathizing with your enemy. First they tortured them, but then they took them to lunch and just started talking to them. But you could also argue that they were doing that based on his fourth lesson about maximizing efficiency. They weren't taking him to lunch just to be nice, because they did threaten to take them back and torture them again. And you could argue that, that was just a more efficient way of getting information out of them. And obviously, since they're trying to get information out of these people, lesson 6, get the data. There's more information. It wasn't like stats and numbers, it was names and dates, but obviously we're in a war. We want to get as much information as we can. I think lesson 9 was really interesting. In order to do good, you may have to engage in evil. And torture, by its very definition, is evil. It's inflicting pain, it's inflicting suffering on people. But we were doing it to terrorists and, trying to bring justice for the September 11th attacks, preventing future attacks on American soil. It wasn't the prettiest thing that we ever did, but who knows if it saved lives. I'm sure anybody who was alive back when these attacks happened, or is at least a little bit older and kind of knew what was going on, um, I'm sure they were really happy to see justice for bin Laden. Um, lesson 5. Lesson 5 was kind of interesting. Proportionality should be a guideline in war. And I think this one is pretty debatable because this wasn't a normal state versus state war. This was state versus a terrorist organization. So how do you actually measure what's proportional? Unless you're going to say you want to go eye for an eye, if you kill somebody, then we'll kill that person. But that's not typically something that we do in the United States. If you get convicted on murder charges, you might go to prison for the rest of your life, but a very small percentage of criminals in the United States actually end up getting the death penalty. So it's not exactly an eye for an eye. And if you do Google this, you'll find some people who say the death penalty would be more humane than life in prison. Some people say life in prison is more humane. Some people argue that one side or the other is more just. So it's kind of an interesting debate. And considering that the 9/11 terrorist attacks were the greatest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, something like a little sleep deprivation or waterboarding doesn't seem exactly proportional to killing thousands of innocent people, causing millions of dollars in economic damages. It's hard to measure proportionality when it's a state versus a terrorist organization. Lesson 11 is about human nature. This one kind of goes back to that lunch scene, because people are hardwired to avoid suffering. So it's kind of easy to see how torture could be effective to get information out of suspected terrorists. But it also explains their strategy. People adjust to a certain baseline treatment, and any deviation from that baseline, either positive or negative, will significantly change people's behavior. People respond strongly to rewards and punishments. So by taking them out to lunch after torture, that's like a reward. If they give you the information, you keep treating them well, they keep giving you information. Or if they don't give you information, after they've gotten a little more used to just having a conversation, having lunch, and you threaten to take them back down to torture, that could have a significant impact on their behavior as well. The Frost-Nixon film, the connection to that one is about, is something okay or not okay depending on who does it or who they do it to. One of Nixon's famous quotes from the Frost-Nixon film and from his interview was, "If it's okay if the president does it." And in Zero Dark 30, you could ask, is torture okay because the United States is the one doing it? We didn't provoke it. We were the ones who were attacked. And the fact that it's being done to terrorists, it's not being done to, somebody who evaded taxes. We're using it specifically on these terrorists to get information, and you could argue that that's a national security risk. But is there a right and wrong regardless of the circumstances, or can it change, given certain situations? Like, is torture justified because of who these people were, because of why we were doing it, because of who we are? Really anything like that. And I'm sort of skipping around here, but in Street Fight, that's sort of similar to the Frost-Nixon comparison. Street Fight had Sharp James, who would do anything to win, kind of played dirty, and then you had Cory Booker, who did everything by the books, didn't break the rules. And in that film, it seemed pretty obvious. Sharp James was a bad guy, Cory Booker was the good guy. In this situation, it's a little bit more complicated, but it almost seems like we were closer to Sharp James, where I think to most people it seems like what we did would have been justified, but it's not the nicest way to go about it. It might be the most effective, we don't know, or at least I don't know. They obviously thought it was, and they did end up catching bin Laden, but it doesn't seem like the thing that Cory Booker would have done. In Street Fight, he was, even though he was being targeted and harassed by Sharp James, he always stuck to his principles. You could argue, is there a time where it's okay to give up certain principles? Or do certain priorities take place ahead of other principles? Like, if you're trying to save American citizens, is it okay to maybe torture a terrorist? And then finally, the Wag the Dog film. In one of the film reviews that we read on D2L, one of the characters was talking about, did TV destroy the electoral process? And in modern times, it's probably more about internet than TV, but TV is still pretty influential. And in Zero Dark 30, they had the scene of President Obama condemning torture. And then they just had that, they had that shot of the CIA where they seemed like baffled that he would say something like that, because he wasn't the one on the front lines. He wasn't the one, in the room doing what the CIA was doing, and he wasn't an expert in that. He probably didn't know as much as the people who organized this did. So he was kind of going off general principles, and he didn't seem to be taking the situation into account. And I think you could argue on either side of that. You could say that that was wrong because, they were trying to bring bin Laden to justice. They were trying to prevent other attacks. So if they have to play ugly in order to do that, then that's okay. But you could also argue that, if you're going to fight this group of terrorists, but then you're going to torture people in order to do it, what are you fighting for? So there's just a lot of really interesting debates that you could have had connecting certain themes of this film to some of the other ones that we've watched. And there's a lot of things that I was thinking of from films that came from outside of class. I just caught up on The Walking Dead, and I was just noticing that there's a lot of these political movies that we've watched. The themes of these movies are implemented into almost every TV show or movie that we watch, but they take a back seat to maybe the comedy of it, or if it's a horror film. But it is interesting.
Hi guys, this is Belinda Howland. I am from Wexford, PA, and I'm an early childhood education major. So to wrap up the PowerPoint, we have 7 discussion questions for you guys. So I'm just going to get into them. The first one I got from the article that described why ZDT was inaccurate, and that was, can torture be justified? I thought this one was really interesting and could bring up some good discussions in the dialogues. The second one is, why did Maya have such an obsession, as some of the characters in the film called it, with finding Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti? If you guys don't remember who this man was, he was the man that they found based off of his cell phone. They thought he was dead at one point, and it turned out he wasn't. And from following him, they also saw him go into the compound that Osama bin Laden lived in. On to number 3. At the end of the movie, Maya gets on a large plane. When the pilot asks her where she wants to go, she is speechless and breaks down in tears. What do you think ZDT filmmakers wanted audiences to get from this scene? Number 4. I also got some inspiration for this from the same article is used with number 1, which is why ZDT was inaccurate. From that, we learned even though the torture in the movie at the black sites was not accurate, why do you think filmmakers thought it was necessary to include those scenes anyway? If you guys don't remember, the black sites were the places that the CIA interrogated people in like the Saudi groups. And in the article describing why ZDT is inaccurate, you learn that the torture in the movie is not actually how it was in real life. In real life, any torture that they did had to be approved by officials in Washington, D.C., so there's no way that dog collars or chaining people up to the ceiling could have ever happened, because how would that get approved? I think they did do waterboarding, if I remember reading correctly, but interrogation was, I believe, almost enough to get the information that agents needed. On to number 5. Do you think Maya's co-workers took her seriously? Why or why not? Does her being female have any impact on her job? So this question's kind of like a 2-parter. I personally noticed some scenes where some of her male counterparts kind of brushed her off. So I'm curious as to what everybody else thinks. And number 6, why do you think the CIA agent Jessica trusted her lead, the doctor, so much? If you guys don't remember, Jessica was the woman who went to dinner with Maya at the hotel that was bombed. And her lead, which is the air quote doctor, was the guy who contacted her saying that he is a part of these groups and he can get her information that she needs. But as we saw in the movie, that's not actually what happened, because he was never going to give her information because he was a suicide bomber. And everybody at Camp Chapman that was around did die, and that is actually based on real events. So yeah, why do you think that Jessica believed in this so much, enough to bake him a cake and all that stuff that we saw in the movie. And for the last question, Dr. Rice gave us a article that was Zero Dark 30, A Beginner's Guide. So if it wasn't for this, at least I know for myself, and I assume for others, I don't think we would be able to follow along with the movie as well as we did with all of the acronyms and names and all that stuff that they included. So do you think that there was a motive as to why filmmakers included so many names and acronyms that people may not know in the film? Do you think it was maybe to want people to look into the situation more and do their own research, or do you think it was for another reason? So I'm curious as to what everybody thinks. So I think that these questions are going to be able to spark some good discussions in the dialogues. I hope everybody understood them enough and I explained them well enough. But yeah, that's it for our presentation. Thank you for watching, and good luck on finals, everybody. And yeah, we did it.